Let's start in and look at that fit, man. Woo! Flawlessness. And Brian's still working on this little bit. Fucking rules. Said it can't be done, but our time has come. We play with fire and burn. Step into cage near completion, or at least a pretty good idea where I'm going with it and where it's going to sit. Now I can jump into working on the floors, which is going to prove to be a pretty tedious job because of how it's been so far and what they look like and what I have to do to seal this sucker up. Because the thing is, building the floor, I'm going to have to also build, which is basically a rear firewall. And of course, I want to seal off the driver's cabin of this vehicle because as soon as I start rolling smoke off those back tires and drift, it's gonna fill up real quick, make it hard to breathe, make it hard to see, and I just don't feel like dealing with that. I want the air to flow through this thing, and I want no obstructions. I want to be able to see what I'm doing. Because this ElCamino, unfortunately, apparently, obviously, sat in a mud puddle for a couple years. The chassis and everything is pretty rusted. Now I'm lucky enough that there's no holes or major structure issues with the frame at all. It's pretty solid, but it has a nice coating of rust on it. So before I start welding up pipes and tubing and a bunch of chunks of metal to it, I gotta clean it off and make sure that it's real good so I can get a good contact and make sure that the weld just penetrates right through both ends of the metal and everything is gonna be strong, solid, and good. All cleaned up, gotta lay down some measurements. So I get in there with the tape measure and start figuring out exactly how wide I need these things from frame rail to frame rail and how I'm gonna structure it. It's gotta hold the transmission tunnel, it's gotta hold up the floor, and it's gotta hold up a set of race seats. So you want that to be really solid, and I think I'm gonna probably work the flooring into the caging, making, again, the whole ElCamino, everything, the car, this truck, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be one solid piece at the end. This is a vehicle where the frame could separate from the body. You could lift the body off of it, do some work to it, pull all the frame apart, just be left with a bare chassis. But now, it's more like your standard unibody car where it's going to be all one piece, all welded tight together. So I have to make sure I get the right measurements and I build something here that's going to be strong enough. Ultimately, the flooring is going to be squared off because it's a good square section to work with, and it's going to be a very, very simple design. So, being as it's going to be a very simple design, the floor parts are very simple to make. Measure them out, cut them out, tack them in. It can be easier than that. Key point here is making sure that I weld both ends of the tube at the exact same spot on the frame so that when you're looking at it from the side or measuring it, it goes straight 90 degrees crossing that chassis, and it's going to give me a good structure to build off of. I'm going to have to run two down alongside of it that's going to hold my transmission tunnel. That's going to be the opposite side of the seat rail. Since one seat rail, these sparcos are pretty big, one seat rail is actually going to sit on the chassis. The other one, well, I had to make something there in its place. So I decided to put 2 pieces of tubing, make it all uniform, make it all match. It's the same size as the cage so that when I tie it in, it's all going to look good together and it's all going to be structurally the same size, which should prove to be beneficial. So all I really had to do now was make sure I got the right measurements, use the throat line technique, and cut out the chunks of metal where I needed. Skips me having to use a pipe notcher, and also it gives me a little bit of freedom. So if I want to move stuff a little bit, I can always grind a little bit extra out, have a bit more clearance. But you got to make sure you're pretty on point or else it won't work out. I've had multiple problems, but that's because of the way that my vise was at this current time, flopping around. It was really nonsense. I should have done something about it earlier, but if you... The next step, making sure all the pipes fit in properly. That's kind of a sketchy part because it's easy to let your eyes play tricks on you, and in fact they actually did at this spot. I ended up welding on the wrong side of the marking, but that's besides the point. We won't get into that. Now after I had the cross beams in the way I wanted them, the tubing fit nicely. The bars that run parallel with the frame, I fit those in as best as I could, made sure all the measurements were good, and tacked them in where I need them. Now you might notice that one of these is a little bit off of the other one. I measured it out and I pushed it over the same size as that tubing on one side to move it over because I have an intention to make a trans tunnel that comes off, and I'm gonna make some sort of latching system, and I might need that a little bit of extra room for an idea. I have to clip it down to bolt it down. We're gonna try to get some maybe rib nuts or something like that to be able to do this, but I have to kind of plan ahead, and it looked kind of weird and it looks off balance because of this, but you're gonna see how it works out in the end because the drive shaft could potentially be pretty big also, and I'm gonna need a little bit extra room in there. The way the floor is designed, there's gonna be a bar running underneath the drive shaft, and then it's gonna fit inside the tunnel, so it's got its own kind of tunnel thing, and the drive shaft does not sit any lower than the chassis at all. Everything actually sits a little bit higher because of how much lower I'm making this vehicle. The suspension in the back is sitting up way high so that the drive shaft's going to sit high, and in turn I brought the motor up so I can clear the oil pan so the frame and the body of the car can sit way low. Now I'm kind of winging it a little bit. I have a plan, but it's not a very solid plan because if you guys have been following this, you know I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just learning as I go, and I'm not making it up, but I'm getting an education on the fly. And so everything might not work out, but I believe it will. So the next task is going to be to take the seat off the shelf and throw it inside the ElCamino, see how it fits, make sure everything lines up. Now this is a really big Sparco bucket seat. This is the Evo 3, which is I believe one of the biggest Sparco seats you can get. And it's pretty wide on the inside. The bottom of the bucket is at least 18 inches wide. So that actually causes me a couple problems because even though the ElCamino is a big car, it's an A-body chassis like a Chevelle or whatnot, it still gives me a little bit of issue with the way the transmission tunnel is going to sit so high. The way the thing is positioned and the way the truck's been slammed on the ground with everything elevated to get the frame and the chassis lower, it's going to give me a trans tunnel that's almost the equivalent of an armrest. It's going to sit pretty high. So to get the seats to fit in properly between the doors when they're shut and the trans tunnel and underneath that cage is maybe going to be a little bit of a challenge. Now it's the Evo 3, it's the biggest one. I slide around in there a lot. Even the Evo 2 is a little bit big for me, honestly, but I have an Evo 2 for my driver's seat. That's the one that's in the RX-7 right now. I'm very comfortable with it. I know it, I like it, it feels good. It's my ass is imprinted in that seat after so many miles, so it's comfy. It's comfy, it's part of me. And that's going to be my driver's seat, and the Evo 3 is going to be the passenger seat. And the Evo 3, not only did I get a very, very good price, and that's why I bought it, because I guess not a lot of dudes are going to run this seat, but I've got an extra big seat so that because I got some friends that are big. So if I could give them rides in the car and they're good and they're comfy and they're safe, which is most important. If you don't fit in the race seat properly and you're trying to strap yourself in all cattywampus and stuff like that, that's a lot of danger that could potentially happen. So I got to keep the homies safe. I got this big Evo 3. We're going to put 4-point harnesses both sides, and I'll just bring some extra cushions for the littler dudes or little dudettes that want to go for a rip in the car, and that way they can fit nice and snug inside, and everybody's going to be safe, comfortable, happy, and going 150 miles an hour sideways.